So your business is thriving, but your marriage seems to be lacking intimacy. And it's probably been happening for a while, but you've never really noticed it until now. And that's because it's starting to hurt. But the good news is it doesn't have to stay that way. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Shaquela, Human Flourishing Coach, on a mission to help wives in business live and lead from God's pace and not worldly pressure. This is a safe, Christ centered space for wives in business, women who love God, honor their covenant, and are building successful businesses, but yet they still feel stretched thin between that marriage and business. Here, we are intentional about slowing down, realigning our priorities, and regaining control of our time so that we can build successful businesses without sacrificing our marriage just the way God predestined. So let's get into it. The real reason why your business is thriving and the intimacy in your marriage is lacking is because somewhere along the lines, your success started defining your worth. Somewhere you started to believe that the more success you have, the more your value increased, right? The more sales you brought in, the more likes your video got, the more followers you got on your social media. All of those actions that you took to achieve those successes, those wins in business became how you defined your worth. And so, not intentionally, but you started to focus on that more. You started to want more of that. You started to put more of your efforts and your attention in how do I get my next win? How do I get my next follower? How can I increase my next amount of likes in the video that I'm getting ready to put out? And somehow we shift to performance instead of covenant, right? Without even realizing it, we have now allowed the world to define our worth and our value instead of the way that God originally defined our value and our worth. So here's the truth about that, right? God declared our worth before our work. So before we did anything, before we achieved anything, before any title, any role that we have, God already defined our worth in Proverbs 31:10, which says, "Who can find a virtuous woman whose price is far above rubies?" And in some translations, it may say diamonds, it may say pearls. But at the end of the day, before anything that that woman did, before any title or role that she had, God already identified her as virtuous, and he identified her as a woman who was far more valuable and far more worth rubies, diamonds, pearls, or any other, in today's society, expensive um, stone, right? And so we have to remember to look at ourselves the way that God looks at us. Because it's so easy in today's society to get wrapped up into the pressure to perform, the pressure to meet all these goals and try to conform to a specific algorithm and try to learn, which platform is going to work best and try to make sure that we're showing up at this amount of time of day and this amount of time a week just to be able to acquire, you know, a client, just to be able to acquire a follower so that we can hopefully turn that into a potential sale. And when we do that and we start to actually have good success with that, somewhere along the lines, our identity shifts and we start to internalize that and use that to drive or motivate the rest of our actions. And so, little by little, especially for us wives, a little by little, that starts to eat away at our time. It starts to consume our time. And we end up spending more time focusing on continuing that business success, continuing those things that are driving sales. And before we know it, days have gone by, weeks have gone by, or even months have gone by, and we have not been intentional about spending time with our spouse. We have not been intentional about creating those, sacred times to where it's just you and your husband and you're doing something that is supportive and edifying to each other. Um, because you're so consumed with that feeling that you get from reaching that goal and reaching that success. And so that performance, that pressure to perform literally becomes your worth. And that is just not the way that God intended things for it to be. And that's not what God says about you. And I think, that God was very intentional about that because he knew the challenges we would face when it comes to wanting to be successful and also having, other obligations as far as, your marriage and your home and things like that. And God wanted to make sure that we as his daughters knew our worth and our value before anything else. That way, when we have those successes in business, it won't pull us away from the one thing that we should be focusing on first before anything else, which if you're married is your marriage because that's your covenant. We won't allow that business success to become a driving factor or, the main motivator because once, that business starts to have its lows, which all business will have highs and lows, if our value and our worth is centered in, how successful we are in business and how well we're doing in business, then the minute we experience a low season or a dry season, what does that say about our worth? How is that going to affect how we feel and how we view ourselves? So we have to make sure that we are being intentional about operating from a place of covenant and not a place of performance. Because let's just be honest, your worth is not defined by what you do and how well you do it. Your worth is defined by who you are and whose you are. And you are a daughter of the king. You are a woman that was created with worth far more above rubies. And you are a woman that produces fruit in every season. How do I know that? Because that's exactly what God said about you. That is the way that He created you. So we have to be intentional about living and operating from a place of covenant that we have with God and the covenant that we have with our spouse and not performance. Because if we operate from a place of performance, it is always going to rob us of our time and of our energy from the things that we really should be spending more time and energy with because we're chasing that next success. We're chasing that next level of worth or value. So I really want you to kind of just reflect and think about what motivates you in your decisions, in your actions, and think about it. Are you operating from a place of performance or are you operating from a place of covenant? When you're going throughout your day and your weeks in business and you're having successful days, you're hitting numbers, you're achieving certain goals, and then you have moments to where You may have an off day or your numbers may not have been great. Does that affect how you feel about yourself? Because if it does, it might just be that your identity is shifted a little and you're starting to operate from a place of performance instead of a place of covenant. And so be honest with yourself. This is not anything to make you feel guilty or condemned. This is how we grow. This is how we improve. And truth be told, you can't shift anything or any perspective that you refuse to see. So take a moment to just evaluate the way that you've made your last decisions, the way that you've been operating in business lately, and does it seem like you're chasing that next success, or does it seem like you are appreciating the success that you're having and you're still able to take a step back from it and enjoy, time with your husband? You're able to be intentional about your covenant because you know that whether you continue that push for your next, goal or your next success, your value, your worth is not going to change because God has already established that. So let me know in the comments how you feel about it, what you think about it. And even if you are operating from a place of pressure or a place of performance, that's okay. Just acknowledge it and then make a decision in that moment that I'm going to make this shift and I'm going to start operating from covenant and not performance because I know my worth and my level of success, my work, what I'm doing and how well I do it does not define my value and my worth because God has already determined that. So again, let me know, drop it in the comments. I would love to hear how you're doing in that, what changes you're going to make if necessary, or if you're already operating from a place of covenant, then drop that in the comments too. Let's celebrate you for that and basically find a way to encourage, you know, the next wifepreneur that may be struggling to make that shift. What's working for you? So either way, drop it in the comments. And as always, I pray that this episode blessed you. I pray that you found it very encouraging and motivating. And be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. That way, you stay a part of the conversation where we're talking about all things faith, marriage, and business. Until next time, be blessed.